Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, I want to talk to you about a concept that I call the sweet spot. And this is particularly useful if you're somebody who, like me, when you start out, you learn things really, really fast. And I think this is really common where everything's super easy to begin with. I remember I did this course called like the web developer course or something on what was it? What's it called? On Udemy. I never use Udemy anymore, but I did this course um, with this guy called Rob Percival, and he takes you from the simplest stuff with web development like HTML and CSS, and he basically builds you up to the point where you're using PHP to build like a login site. Honestly, the server side stuff wasn't that great, but the point is, I learned so much so quickly. Within a couple of weeks, I felt like I went from somebody who knew nothing to being a web developer. And I was super excited because I thought that frankly, I thought I was a stupid person and I couldn't learn how to code. But for that little period of time, I thought, you know what? I can do this. I can become a web developer. I had a dream of a website I wanted to build. And so I just kind of ran at that dream, bought this course, and learned super, super, super quickly. And so that was a really great feeling. That was a rush. And my guess is if you're a web developer or you're starting out as a web developer, you know what I'm talking about. But then eventually, soon after that, I ended up hitting a wall. It was like I couldn't figure out what to do next, and I'd find like an advanced topic, and I couldn't figure out how to learn that advanced topic. And then it was like, how do you create a login system? And I'd try and build my own login system from scratch, and everything was like, it slowly became really, really hard. So I didn't like whack into a brick wall, but I felt like I had this momentum, was learning really, really fast, and then it's like I gradually just started to sort of peter out and plateau. And this is something that happened to me in piano as well, where I was really, really awesome to begin with because I was learning stuff super fast. I learned piano later on in life, whereas a lot of people learned when they were 6 years old, and so I learned things super, super quickly because I could sort of rush through all of the basics. But then, the same thing. I reached a point where everything started letting me down. It's like, oh, my technique can't catch up with this. And I felt like everything I was learning was happening super, super slowly. So, what do you do about this? What do you do when you start hitting a wall with your learning and you feel like you can't progress? In exercise, they call this the plateau, where you feel like you're doing weights, you're doing it to failure, but you feel like you're not gaining muscle anymore. And here's my answer to that. It's a concept that I call the sweet spot. So, the reason we can learn really, really quickly from the beginning is that there are so many gaps in our brain, and it's very obvious what those gaps are when you're starting out with something. It's very obvious and easy to break up what the fundamentals of coding is. You can break it down into tiny little pieces and then learn those pieces one at a time. This is why beginner courses are actually they're hard to do well, but they're actually not that difficult to make. You could do a really bad quality to beginner course and still learn pretty well. At least that's my opinion. I could get somebody who doesn't know a lot about coding, who's not a particularly great teacher, and they could probably do a beginner course that somebody could at least follow and learn the basics from. So anyway, so the solution then, if you hit this plateau, is to figure out the what. It's to answer that question, what do I focus on next? The problem is when you start hitting the sort of mid-level range is that it's almost like there are thousands of these things that you can choose from to work on. And your brain, or at least this is what I get with my brain, is like, oh, I could learn that, or I could learn that, or I could learn that. And it's like you're trying to learn all of these different things. And the reality is we can only focus on one thing at a time. And so if you can figure out the what is that one next thing that I need to focus on? And you just focus on that one thing, then you'll get a little bit better. And then when you're done with that, you've found the next little thing that you need to focus on, and then you'll get a little bit better, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. And so that really has been the key for me from getting from an intermediate developer to what I would consider to be a more advanced developer. And one of the reasons that this is a problem and that people hit this problem in the first place is that when we're starting out, since everything is so obvious and so easy, since the what is so obvious, we think that it should be that easy when we become an intermediate developer. So then we get to the intermediate developer phase, and it's like, um, you're used to it being super easy to figure out what to focus on next, but now it's super difficult to figure out what to focus on next. All right, so let's break this down. Let's see if we can break this down one step further. And this podcast is an opportunity for me to sort of think things out loud so that I can teach the concepts later on. So I might be a little bit all over the place here, but stay with me. Let's see if we can break it down. So the first thing I'd probably do for figuring out the what is saying, just figuring out what is it that I want to learn next. All right. So you might, for example, you might have Vue, React, Angular. You might be thinking, I don't know which one of these to focus on next. The first thing there is to just choose one. Obviously for us, it would be Vue.js because, we're Quasar people. So then you go, okay, I'm going to learn Vue.js. Now, what specifically do I want to learn about Vue.js? And then you do a little bit of research into that. You might go to the docs and you might go, okay, here's a getting started guide for Vue.js. And then you go, okay, cool, I've got my what? I go through this getting started guide for Vue.js. And then you finish that guide and it gets a little bit harder again because it's like, well, where do I take it from here? And you might think to yourself, well, you do a bit more research and you go, well, there's SSR, that's one concept I could learn. There's routing, that's another concept. There's this idea of state management. And then you go, okay, which of these is most important to me? And you might choose state management. So you might use go into something like Vuex. And then you look at the getting started guide for that and you're like, okay, cool, I've figured out my what. So you go through the getting started guide for Vuex. And then it's like, okay, I understand state management, but and maybe you want to go a little bit deeper into state management because you're still finding it difficult to, architect that. And so you might think, okay, I need to figure out how to do architecture with state management. And then you might look online, like what are some packages for architecture? What are some guides for architecture that I can find online for state management? And you get the idea. And so the problem is a lot of people face is if you've got all of these different things you can choose, Vue Router, Vuex, what else? Choosing a backend. It's very important to narrow down exactly what you're going to work on in that exact moment and really drilling down to the exact thing that you're going to work on, the exact guide that you're going to follow. Putting in the extra work to doing that. Sometimes it used to take me an hour or two just to figure out what my next what was. But if you can put the effort into that, then it becomes a lot easier to go from an intermediate to an advanced developer. And this kind of brings me then to the concept of the sweet spot. So if what you're working on feels too easy for you, then it might be time to start finding something that's a little bit more difficult. And if you're doing something that's too difficult and you really don't understand it, then it might be time to find a guide, a tutorial, or a concept that is a little bit simpler there. And here's the reason. If something is really, really easy, you don't grow very quickly. It's great for immersion. If you spend a lot of time doing easy stuff, then you learn that stuff in a very solid way. So you need to spend some time doing easy things and, reiterating over what you already know, revision. But if you spend too much time there, you don't grow. Whereas if something's too hard, then your brain will shut down quickly. You might get this sometimes where you work for 5 or 10 minutes and then your brain just starts shutting down. And it's, I get this all the time when something is too difficult, especially when I was diving into the world of Docker. I was starting to be like, okay, this is too hard. I can't grasp these concepts. It's too many concepts at once. And my brain starts to shut down. I get tired after about 10 or 15 minutes of work. So finding the sweet spot to me is finding working on something that is difficult. So you can't quite figure it out, but it's easy enough that you can figure it out, but it's difficult enough that you need to push your brain a little bit. And that's how you enter a flow state, by the way. All of these ideas are connected. So the sweet spot to me is finding that point where it's not too easy, but not too hard, so that you're pushing your brain just a little bit so that it grows and it forces itself to fill in the gaps. By the way, one of the pros of this is that when you go to bed that night, your brain will start working on those problems. And so that's when you get the thing where you're working on something hard and you can't quite figure it out, but then you wake up the next day and then you wake up with the solution to the problem. All right? If you can get yourself into that state where it's a little bit too difficult and it takes you longer than you feel like it should to figure it out, but you can figure it out, that's when you go to bed that night and the next day everything becomes a bit clearer. And so to me, the optimal learning experience for me is sort of a combination where you want to spend time iterating over easy stuff, building websites with patterns that you already know, but then spending about an hour or two every single day doing stuff that's a little bit too difficult for you, pushing your limits. And if you do that every single day, then every night when you go to bed, your brain will start processing and relearning and finding those gaps and trying to fill those gaps and pulling information from stuff you've learned in the past, um, so that when you wake up the next morning, you can do a little bit more. And then once again, you do some more hard stuff that day, go to bed, your brain gets to work on it. And by the way, you'll sleep better that night if you're doing this. Yeah, so I guess, so maybe I can try and break all of this down now. Um, so there's the concept of figuring out what to learn. So figuring out your what. So that's the first thing. The second thing is then finding the sweet spot. Making sure that your what is hard enough that it pushes you, um, but not so hard that it feels impossible. And then what would the third thing be? I've forgotten now. I might have to go back and listen to this. But I guess that's the point of this podcast where we can explore these concepts together. So figure out your what, find the sweet spot, and spend. That's right. Okay, I would then say spend time every single day doing something that is just beyond your current knowledge, so that every night when you go to bed, your brain is utilizing is when you go to bed, your brain is focusing on things that it should be focusing on. By the way, another side thing here, if you don't do that, then when if you watch television, the first thing before you go to bed at night, then your brain is going to think about the TV show. Whereas if before you go to bed, you think about the hard thing that you were working on that you couldn't figure out, then your brain is more likely to work on that. And so that's one thing that I like to try and do. Make sure the thing that I think about before I go to bed is that hard concept that I was trying to figure out for the day, or like, remembering the hard challenges that I faced and how I solved them. So yeah, I hope you found this one useful. It was a little bit haphazard, but hey, that's the fun of it. You get to go along on this journey with me. So I hope you enjoyed this one. By the way, if you like learning about this stuff and if you like learning through videos, then check out quasarcast.com/register. That's my website where I teach you how to learn Quasar through videos. At the moment, everything is free, but down the line, I'm going to have paid content where we'll build advanced apps. We'll look into learning about architecture and stuff like that. And by the way, if you haven't already, also check out The Quasar Show, which is a new TV show just for Quasar that comes out every 2 weeks. So that's quasarcast.com/register, and just search for The Quasar Show on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed this one. See you next time.